I don't like just about every cover of a Beatles song with one big exception, and that is Earth, Wind & Fire's cover of Got to Get You Into My Life, which I think is actually better than the original. For a long time I thought it was just because Earth, Wind & Fire's version is a fun and funky song, but then I discovered the story behind the song, and it's bigger and crazier than I ever imagined. It involves a missed opportunity, lots of horns, and a giant flop of a Beatles movie that they want you to forget about. Seriously, I didn't know this existed, and my mind is blown. Today, I'm digging into the Beatles song Got to Get You Into My Life, what they were going for, how Earth, Wind & Fire's version perfected that idea, and the absolutely insane story of how it all came to be. In order to understand why the Earth, Wind & Fire version of this song feels so good, and in my opinion is the ultimate version of the song, we've got to start all the way back at the beginning of the Beatles. After a few years of playing under various band names, John, Paul, and George landed a residency in Hamburg, Germany in 1960, where they stayed for 2 years, playing for hours on end most nights. Here they played covers, did 20-minute solos, and got better as musicians. Then in 1963, after adding Ringo, they leave Hamburg and release their first album, Please Please Me, followed by With the Beatles the same year. Of the 14 songs on Please Please Me, 6 of them are covers. And the same is true of the next album, With the Beatles. Hard Day's Night comes out in 1964, no covers. Beatles for Sale comes out in 1964. Again, 6 of the 14 songs are covers. In 1965, Help is released, which only has 2 covers. Followed by Rubber Soul in 1965, again, no covers. All of these covers are from artists like Chuck Berry, Little Richard, The Marvelettes, The Miracles, The Cookies. That's a real one, I didn't make that up. And with the exception of 4 songs, 16 out of the 20 are all from black artists. John Lennon even said after the Beatles broke up, it was the black music we dug. Of course, that's only half the story. The other songs on these albums are Beatles originals that are classics. These are some of the songs that propelled them to global stardom. When you listen to these early Beatles songs, a lot of them sound pretty similar, but after running the same formula for a few years, it feels like the Beatles got tired of their typical sound and wanted to change things up. Once you get to Sgt. Pepper, the album, not the soundtrack. We will talk about the soundtrack, but right now I mean the album. They've stopped touring and have changed the idea of what a studio album can be. Then of course you have the late era stuff, the White Album, Abbey Road, Let It Be. These later albums sound decidedly different than their early stuff. But just before we get to the butterfly that is Sgt. Pepper, and after we have the caterpillar that is their early stuff, we have the cocoon of amorphous goop that is 1966's Revolver. Okay, that's too harsh, but you get my point. The album contains no covers, but all of a sudden they start trying new stuff. A string section on Eleanor Rigby, classical French horn on For No One, Indian instrumentation on Love You Too. Revolver was released on August 5th, 1966, and on August 21st, they announced that they're done touring. So this album sits right in the middle of the Beatles trying to find a new sound, experimenting with new ideas and instruments, but at the same time too busy to dive as deep as they do with Sgt. Pepper. Album, not soundtrack. And near the end of Revolver, we get the song Got to Get You Into My Life, which features for the very first time horns. Now that you understand early Beatles history, let's talk about Got to Get You Into My Life and what they were going for. The early Beatles songs sound like early Beatles songs. Some of the best rock and roll from the time, mixed with covers of some of the best songs from the 50s and early 60s. What other genre of music was rising in prominence at this time? Stax Records, Motown, originally called Tamla, soul music with a mainstream pop appeal. When talking about Got to Get You Into My Life in 1968, John Lennon said, "We were doing our Tamla Motown bit. You see, we're influenced by whatever's going. Even if we're not influenced, we're all going that way at a certain time." Even though John described this as their take on Motown, and they referred to the horns as soul trumpets, the first takes of this song were not soulful at all. The droning organ sound is reminiscent of Indian music, like at the beginning of Tomorrow Never Knows, off the same album. This song was recorded and re-recorded over a period of a few months in 1966, and changed a few times, until ultimately adding 5 session musicians to come play horns. After one mix, Paul wanted the horns to sound bigger, but rather than bring the horn players in again, they simply duplicated it and ran it just slightly out of sync to make it sound bigger. While Lennon and McCartney are both credited for writing this song, like all their songs, they've both separately admitted this one was all Paul. And this song was produced by the 5th Beatle, the producer George Martin. Here's the thing about this being a Motown song. I don't hear it. See, I'm a bass player. Paul McCartney is a fantastic bass player, but if he really wanted a Motown sound, he would have emulated James Jamerson, who played bass on most of the Motown stuff. James Jamerson bass lines are incredible. They're melodic, rhythmic, weaving in and out, playing passing tones, syncopated rhythms, and redefining what a bass line can be.
For once in my life, I have someone who needs me, someone I've needed so long.
You hear that bass line?
For once unafraid, I can go where life leads me. Somehow I know I'll be strong.
By contrast, Paul's bass line on this song is much more straightforward rock and roll. There's not a lot of movement with the notes, and the rhythm is very straightforward. If Got to Get You Into My Life was actually a Motown song, it would probably sound something like this.
I was alone, I couldn't ride, I didn't know what I would find there. Another road, or maybe I could see another kind of mind there.
A more comparable sound, I think, is Stax Records. Stax was a label similar to Motown, but based out of Memphis instead of Detroit, and focused more on Southern soul, blues, gospel, and funk. For example, listen to Hold On, I'm Coming by Sam and Dave. A little more straightforward bass. It's not wandering around like Jamerson. A little more root focused, a little more driving. This sounds much more like Got to Get You Into My Life. In fact, this song was released in March of 1966, and recording for Got to Get You Into My Life began in April. The original idea was actually to record Revolver in the US, probably at Stax in Memphis, but it fell through. As Paul recalled in 1966, we were going to record Revolver in America, but they wanted a fantastic amount of money to use the facilities there. I think there were only 2 tracks on the LP that would have sounded better if we'd cut them in America. Taxman and Got to Get You Into My Life, because they needed that raw quality that you just can't get in this country for some reason. The Beatles already had plenty of hits and had covered lots of black artists in their early days. 16 of their 20 covers, remember? But at this point in their career, they're trying to stick to originals and come up with a new sound. Got to Get You Into My Life is the Beatles' attempt to record an original song that sounds like the popular black artists of the day that they loved. Stax Records, mid-60s soul. And by Paul's own admission, they almost got there. They were aiming for a specific target and landed on the board, but if they were able to record at Stax, it would have been a bullseye. So what happens when it's 12 years later, the target has moved, and you have one of the biggest disasters in cinematic and music history? So every few years they release a new Beatles thing. We recently had the Peter Jackson documentary Get Back. Before that was the movie Yesterday, the Cirque du Soleil Beatles Love Show, the movie Across the Universe, Let It Be Naked, the Beatles One album, etc. It's a clever marketing strategy to repackage existing stuff and introduce the Beatles to a new generation. One of the earliest attempts at this was a movie I'm sure you've never heard of called Sgt Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band that was released in 1978. It's a movie based on the off-Broadway musical by Robert Stigwood. He's the man behind the Grease and Saturday Night Fever soundtracks. After poor reviews, he decided to make it into a motion picture. Here's the thing, basing a movie off of a terrible musical that's based off of a random assortment of Beatles songs is a terrible idea. We're talking about a lead character named Billy Shears, his girlfriend whose name is Strawberry Fields. Then he later has a fling with a girl named Lucy in the sky, and guess what her backing band's name is? The Diamonds. This is atrocious stuff. Who would sign up for something like this? Well, Billy Shears is played by Peter Frampton, and the rest of the band is the Bee Gees. Bee Gees member Robin Gibb was so confident about this movie and album, which is largely an assortment of Bee Gees Beatles covers, that before the movie came out, he said, "Kids today don't know the Beatles' Sgt Pepper, and when those who do see our film and hear us doing it, that will be the version they relate to and remember. Unfortunately, the Beatles will be secondary. You see, there is no such thing as the Beatles. They don't exist as a band, and never performed Sgt Pepper live in any case." I know this is a long quote, but it's bonkers, so I have to keep going. When ours comes out, it will be, in effect, as if theirs never existed. When you heard the Beatles do Long Tall Sally or Roll Over Beethoven, do you care about Little Richard or Chuck Berry's version? Fighting words! This movie also stars Steve Martin as Maxwell Edison, George Burns as Mr. Kite, Aerosmith as the future villain band, Alice Cooper as father-son, Billy Preston as the Sgt. Pepper weather vane who comes to life at the end of the movie and saves the day. The movie's closing scene also features a who's who of 1978. George Benson, the band Heart, Etta James, Nils Lofgren from Bruce Springsteen's band, Curtis Mayfield, Lee Oscar, the harmonica player from War, Wilson Pickett, Bonnie Raitt, Minnie Riperton, Tina Turner, Frankie Valli, Grover Washington Jr., Hank Williams Jr., and many, many more. Universal Pictures was anticipating this movie to be this generation's Gone with the Wind, but it wasn't. Critics hated it, it barely made any money, and Rotten Tomatoes currently scores it at 11%. When asked about the movie after it came out, George Harrison said, "I think it's damaged their images, their careers, and they didn't need to do that. It's just like the Beatles trying to do the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones can do it better." The accompanying Sgt. Pepper soundtrack features covers of Beatles songs from multiple eras, covered primarily by Peter Frampton and the Bee Gees. This record made history as the world's first return platinum album, which means 4 million copies were removed from shelves, sent back to distributors, and destroyed. The Bee Gees and Peter Frampton's reputations were obviously tarnished. Still today, this album is not available on streaming or for purchase. But do I have it? Let's take a quick listen. Gotta give it to the bass player, he's shredding. Completely unnecessarily. This is why I don't do Beatles covers. Listen for the background. So Bee Gees. In essence, this is the Star Wars holiday special of the Beatles universe, which were both released in 1978. What was going on in the world? George Lucas created the original Star Wars trilogy and the Star Wars holiday special. George Martin was the 5th Beatle. He produced all the original Beatles stuff and also this album.
I want you. I want you so badly. I want you. I want you so bad. It's driving me mad.
What is happening?
John was quizzical, studied pataphysical science in the home. Late nights, all alone with a test tube.
I don't know if you've seen the Star Wars holiday special or not. It's bad. Really bad. Like Sgt. Pepper, the soundtrack bad. But in the middle of this awful film that dives way too deep into Wookiee culture without subtitles, they introduce a new character, Boba Fett. From the ashes of this movie rises a phoenix who's been a beloved character of Star Wars ever since. Well, in the midst of this insane Sgt. Pepper soundtrack, between the Bee Gees backgrounds, Steve Martin goofs, Aerosmith's cover of Come Together, which is alright, is the phoenix of this album. The Beatles' Boba Fett, redemption itself. Earth, Wind & Fire's cover of Gotta Get You Into My Life. Sorry, in the chaos of explaining all this, I forgot to mention that Sgt. Pepper the movie also features Earth, Wind & Fire as themselves. There's just an Earth, Wind & Fire concert that they all go to, and the band performs Got to Get You Into My Life as themselves. Remember how I said George Martin produced this album? Can you guess the one song he didn't produce? Is this one. Got to Get You Into My Life was the biggest hit from this movie and album, and really the only good thing about it. Not only that, the success of this song set up 3 more top 10 hits the following year for Earth, Wind & Fire. After the Love Is Gone, Boogie Wonderland, and September. So why is this cover so good? What makes it work? Philip Bailey, one of the band's 2 lead singers, stated, "We didn't just cover a Beatles tune, we transformed it, the Earth, Wind & Fire way. The folks at Columbia Records went crazy, and so did Paul McCartney, who wrote the song. Everybody was pleased." Maurice White, the other lead singer, said, "I think it's one of Verdine's best bass performances on record, and according to Paul McCartney, it's his favorite Beatles cover." In 1966, the Beatles set out to hit a target. Write an original song that sounds like the popular black artists of the day that they love. For 1966, that meant that the target was a Stax Records song with soul horns on it. And by Paul's own admission, it could have been better. Fast forward 12 years to 1978. The target has moved. The popular black artists of the day are no longer Stax Records or Motown. They're bands like Earth, Wind & Fire. That's why this cover feels so good. And that's why I like it better than the original. The target has changed slightly, but it's a bullseye. This cover feels like the song found the band it was supposed to be with all along. You can almost think of it like we have a little more of everything. We got more horns, we got more bass, we got more vocals. Over here we got Paul McCartney on bass, over here is Verdine White on bass. 2 incredible bass players, 1 fantastic song. Here we go.
You didn't run, you didn't lie, you knew I wanna hold.
Much bouncier bass.
And had you gone,
Also those horns. The whole thing, the groove is just so good.
Got to get you in, got to get you into my life. Got to get you into my life, yeah. Got to get you into my life.
Don't mishear me, I love the Beatles version of Got to Get You Into My Life. But the Earth, Wind & Fire version transcends a cover song. It feels like how the song is supposed to be. And all it took was a $13 million flop of a movie, a return platinum album, and destroying the careers of Peter Frampton and the Bee Gees. And just when you're like, what else could they do? Where could they go? Guitar! Maybe you've heard of Call and Response? Go ahead, Verdine.